He was happy to see her, but he wasn't waiting on her. You've probably seen the opposite happen before. A guy meets a woman he really likes, and slowly, without realizing it, his entire emotional state starts depending on her. If she texts back quickly, he's in a good mood. If she takes 6 hours to reply, he starts wondering what he did wrong. If she wants to see him, his week is great. If she cancels plans, everything feels ruined. At first, it looks like love. It even feels romantic because he's investing so much of himself into the relationship. But what she's actually experiencing is pressure. She can feel that his happiness is becoming tied to her behavior. Every conversation carries more weight than it should. Every small disagreement feels bigger because his emotional balance depends on things going well between them. The strange part is that most men don't notice this shift while it's happening. They think they're showing commitment. They think they're proving how much they care. What they're really doing is handing over control of their peace of mind. And once that happens, the relationship starts carrying a responsibility it was never meant to carry. The man women often regret losing operates differently. He enjoys her presence, but he doesn't need constant reassurance from her. When she texts him, he's happy to hear from her. When she's busy, he continues with his day. If she's spending time with friends, he doesn't immediately assume something is wrong. His life keeps moving. He's still focused on work, he's still going to the gym, he's still making plans with friends. He's still handling responsibilities. This doesn't mean he cares less. In many cases, he actually cares more because his attention comes from genuine desire instead of fear. He's spending time with her because he wants to, not because he's trying to fill an emptiness. There's a noticeable difference between a man who enjoys your company and a man who needs your company to feel okay. One feels free, the other feels heavy. Most people can't explain the difference in words, but they can absolutely feel it when they're in the relationship. The irony is that this quality often goes unnoticed while the relationship is happening. She gets used to the fact that he's emotionally steady. She gets used to the fact that he doesn't create drama every time something small changes. She gets used to the fact that he has his own life and doesn't demand constant attention. Then, one day, the relationship ends, and she starts meeting other men. Suddenly, she's dealing with endless reassurance, jealousy over harmless situations, emotional ups and downs, and constant pressure to prove her feelings. That's when she remembers the guy who wasn't waiting by his phone all day, the guy who could enjoy her without depending on her, the guy who showed up because he wanted to be there, not because he couldn't function without her. Looking back, that kind of presence feels rare. Not because it's flashy, not because it's dramatic, because it's stable. And stability is one of those things people often underestimate until they spend enough time living without it. She never had to carry the whole relationship. One of the fastest ways for attraction to fade is when a relationship starts feeling like a job. Not because either person is bad, but because one person slowly becomes responsible for keeping everything alive. You've seen it happen. She plans every date, she starts every meaningful conversation, she checks in after arguments. She suggests things to do together. She keeps trying to create moments, while he's mostly reacting to whatever she puts in front of him. At first, she may not mind. Relationships naturally go through periods where one person carries more weight than the other. The problem starts when that becomes the permanent arrangement. After enough time, she stops feeling like she has a partner and starts feeling like she has a responsibility. Every relationship needs energy, and when one person is constantly supplying all of it, exhaustion eventually shows up. Not all at once. It arrives quietly. A little less excitement here, a little less effort there. Until one day, she realizes she's tired, and she can't even explain exactly when it started. The men women often regret losing rarely create that dynamic. They contribute something that makes the relationship feel alive. Maybe it's his sense of humor that can turn an ordinary evening into a memorable one. Maybe it's his ability to take initiative and make plans instead of always asking what she wants to do. Maybe it's the way he handles problems before they become crises. Whatever form it takes, his presence adds energy instead of consuming it. When she's with him, she doesn't feel like she's dragging the relationship forward by herself. She feels like she's walking beside someone who is equally invested in creating something good. That's an underrated quality because it doesn't generate dramatic stories. Nobody brags about dating someone who consistently showed up, handled his responsibilities, and made life easier. Yet those are often the relationships people miss the most after they're gone. Years later, what tends to stand out isn't the expensive gifts or the grand romantic gestures. It's the everyday experience of not carrying everything alone. It's remembering how he would take care of things without being asked, how he would notice problems and handle them, how he would bring ideas, effort, and attention into the relationship without needing constant reminders. When those things disappear, their value becomes obvious. Suddenly, she's dealing with someone who expects her to organize everything, solve every problem, and maintain every connection. That's when memories of the previous relationship start looking different. What once seemed normal now looks rare. What once seemed ordinary now feels valuable. Because the truth is, a relationship becomes much stronger when both people are building it. And the men who understand that are often the ones whose absence is felt long after they've left. When something bothered him, he actually said it. A lot of relationships don't fall apart because of one big problem. They fall apart because of dozens of small problems that never get discussed. Something bothers him, but he says nothing. A comment hurts his feelings, but he lets it slide. A pattern starts developing that he doesn't like, but he convinces himself it's not worth mentioning. Weeks turn into months, and all those unspoken frustrations start piling up in the background. From the outside, everything looks fine. They're still going on dates, they're still talking every day, they're still acting like a couple. But underneath the surface, resentment is growing. The dangerous thing about resentment is that it rarely announces itself. It builds quietly, until one day he's angry about things that happened 6 months ago, and she's confused because she never even knew there was a problem. By that point, the issue isn't the original disagreement anymore. The issue is everything that was left unsaid. The men women often regret losing tend to handle this differently. When something feels off, they address it. Not aggressively, not emotionally, not in a way that turns every conversation into a fight. They simply bring it into the open. If something bothered him, she knew about it. If he felt disrespected, he said so. If he thought the relationship was moving in an unhealthy direction, he talked about it before it became a crisis. That kind of communication creates a feeling of safety because neither person is left guessing. She doesn't have to wonder why he's suddenly distant. She doesn't have to spend days trying to figure out what changed. He gives her the opportunity to understand what's happening in real time. That's far more valuable than people realize. Most relationship damage comes from confusion, assumptions, and silence. Clear communication removes all three. Looking back, many women realize how unusual this quality actually is. They meet men who avoid difficult conversations completely, men who disappear emotionally instead of speaking honestly, men who pretend everything is fine until they suddenly explode over months of buried frustration. That's when the memory of the man who simply talked becomes much more meaningful. Not because he was perfect, not because every conversation went smoothly, but because there was never a mystery about where he stood. You knew what he thought. You knew what he felt. You knew what was working and what wasn't. That level of honesty can feel uncomfortable in the moment because it forces real conversations to happen. Yet over time, it creates something most people are searching for without realizing it. Trust. Not trust built on promises, but trust built on knowing that if something matters, it will be said instead of hidden. And that's a quality people often appreciate most after they've spent enough time dealing with the opposite. He didn't turn every disagreement into a breakup. Every relationship has moments where two people get frustrated with each other. One person says the wrong thing, plans fall through, expectations don't match reality. A disagreement happens over something that seemed small at first, but suddenly becomes a bigger conversation. That's normal. What's not normal is treating every rough patch like the relationship is hanging by a thread. Some people live this way. Every argument becomes a dramatic discussion about whether they should stay together. Every misunderstanding turns into emotional distance. Every difficult week feels like proof that something is fundamentally broken. After a while, you stop focusing on the actual issue because you're too busy managing the fear that the relationship might end. Instead of solving problems, both people start walking on eggshells. The relationship becomes less about connection and more about avoiding the next emotional explosion. The men women often regret losing usually brought something different into the relationship. They understood that conflict and commitment are not the same thing. Just because there was tension didn't mean everything was falling apart. Just because a conversation became difficult didn't mean someone had to threaten leaving. When problems showed up, they dealt with the problem instead of questioning the entire relationship. That created a sense of stability that many people don't fully appreciate while they have it. She knew that if they disagreed, he wasn't going to disappear for 3 days. She knew that one bad conversation wasn't going to erase months or years of good experiences. There was room to be imperfect. There was room to have a bad day. There was room to make mistakes without feeling like the relationship was constantly standing at the edge of a cliff. That kind of emotional steadiness creates a level of comfort that becomes easy to take for granted. Then the relationship ends, and she starts experiencing what life looks like without that stability. Suddenly, every disagreement feels bigger than it should. Every misunderstanding turns into uncertainty. Every conflict carries the possibility of someone walking away. That's when she starts remembering how different things felt with the man who didn't panic every time life got messy. He wasn't calm because he didn't care. He was calm because he understood that real relationships aren't built by avoiding problems. They're built by working through them. Looking back, she realizes how much emotional energy was saved simply because he didn't create unnecessary chaos. He wasn't constantly testing the relationship. He wasn't forcing dramatic moments to prove feelings. He wasn't making every difficult conversation feel like a final conversation. He gave problems the size they deserved, instead of turning them into emergencies. And in a world where so many relationships are filled with unnecessary drama, that kind of steadiness becomes a lot more valuable in hindsight than people expect. He had things going on besides the relationship. One thing that separates the men women often remember from the men they quickly forget is that their entire world didn't shrink down to one person. Before the relationship started, he already had things he cared about. He had work to do, goals he was chasing, responsibilities he took seriously, friends he stayed connected with, and interests that made him feel alive. When the relationship entered his life, it became an important part of his world, but it didn't become his entire world. That's a distinction many people miss. The relationship added to his life instead of replacing it. He could spend an amazing weekend with her and still wake up Monday morning focused on what he needed to accomplish. He didn't abandon everything that made him who he was the moment he fell in love. He brought those things with him into the relationship. At first, this can seem completely ordinary. She sees him going to work, spending time with friends, working on projects, handling responsibilities, and pursuing the things that matter to him. It just becomes part of who he is. What she may not fully realize is how much attraction is created when someone has genuine direction in their life. Not because he's trying to impress anyone, not because he's constantly talking about his ambitions, simply because purpose changes the way a person carries himself. He isn't sitting around waiting for entertainment. He isn't depending on the relationship to fill every empty hour of the day. He has places to be, things to build, and challenges to overcome. The relationship becomes a part of that journey, rather than the destination itself. Being with him feels exciting because his life already has momentum. You aren't trying to push him forward. You're joining someone who is already moving. The value of this often becomes clear only after the relationship ends. She starts meeting people whose lives seem completely dependent on whoever they're dating, people who have no real direction outside of the relationship, people who expect constant attention because they have very little else happening in their world. That's when she remembers the man who always had something meaningful to wake up for, the man who could love deeply without losing himself, the man who never made her responsible for creating purpose in his life. Looking back, she realizes that one of the most attractive things about him wasn't a specific achievement or accomplishment. It was the fact that he was building something. Every week, he seemed to be moving toward a future he cared about. Whether the relationship survived or not, he wasn't standing still. And that kind of forward motion is incredibly difficult to replace because it comes from within. It can't be faked, borrowed, or temporarily performed. It's simply who he is, and people often recognize its value most clearly after it's no longer part of their lives. The day she realized he wasn't coming back. Most people imagine that the moment a relationship ends is the moment regret begins. In reality, that's usually not how it happens. Right after a breakup, emotions are loud. There are arguments replaying in her head, reasons she gave herself, frustrations she remembers, and all the feelings that come with a major change. During that period, she's focused on getting through the breakup itself. The realization comes later. Maybe it's a few months down the road. Maybe it's a year later. Maybe it happens completely by accident when she sees an old photo, hears his name, or runs into someone who knows him. Whatever triggers it, she suddenly becomes curious about what he's doing now. Not because she necessarily wants him back, but because a part of her assumes he'll still be somewhere nearby emotionally. She assumes there will still be a door she could knock on if she ever wanted to. Then she discovers something unexpected. He's gone. Not physically, but mentally and emotionally. He isn't posting messages designed to get her attention. He isn't asking mutual friends about her. He isn't finding reasons to reach out. He isn't trying to reopen conversations that ended long ago. Instead, he's simply living his life. Maybe he's focused on his career. Maybe he's learned new skills. Maybe he's built stronger friendships. Maybe he's become a different version of himself than the one she remembers. Whatever the specifics, one thing becomes obvious. He kept moving. The breakup happened, he felt it, he dealt with it, and then he continued building his future. That realization hits differently because so many people expect emotional attachment to linger forever. They expect some part of the other person to remain frozen in time. When they discover that's not the case, it forces them to see the relationship from a completely new perspective. This is often the moment when memories become sharper, not because she suddenly forgets every problem they had, not because she starts viewing the relationship through fantasy. It's because she realizes what kind of man she actually lost. She realizes he wasn't dependent on her to keep moving forward. He wasn't waiting for permission to be happy again. He wasn't sitting around hoping life would somehow return to what it was. He accepted reality and built something from it. There's a quiet strength in that, which becomes more impressive with time. The longer she sees him continuing to grow, the harder it becomes to dismiss what he brought to the relationship. Because the same qualities that helped him handle the breakup are the same qualities that made him valuable in the first place. His ability to move forward wasn't created by the breakup. The breakup simply revealed it. And for many women, that's the moment they fully understand what they had when it was still theirs. He knew who he was before he met her. When people talk about confidence, they often picture the loudest guy in the room, the guy who always has an answer, always has a story, always knows exactly what to say. But that's not usually the trait that lingers in someone's memory years later. The men women regret losing often had a quieter kind of certainty. Before she entered his life, he already knew what mattered to him. He had opinions that weren't borrowed from other people. He had values he actually lived by. He knew the kind of life he wanted to build and the kind of man he wanted to become. That didn't mean he had everything figured out. It didn't mean he never doubted himself. It meant he had an internal compass. When challenges came up, he wasn't constantly looking around for someone else to tell him who he should be. He had direction, and that direction existed long before the relationship began. That's why he was able to love without losing himself. A lot of people enter relationships hoping the other person will complete something that's missing inside them. They want the relationship to solve their loneliness, fix their insecurities, give them purpose, or provide a permanent source of validation. The problem is that no relationship can carry that kind of weight forever. Eventually, cracks begin to show. The man women often look back on differently wasn't asking her to become the center of his identity. He appreciated her. He cared about her. He made room for her in his life. But he never handed her the responsibility of defining his worth. If she complimented him, he appreciated it. If she disagreed with him, he listened. If she left, it hurt. Yet none of those things changed the fundamental way he saw himself. His identity belonged to him. That gave the relationship a freedom that many couples never experience because neither person was carrying the impossible burden of being the other's entire world. And when you look back at every trait we've talked about, they all lead back to this one. He wasn't waiting on her because he already had a life he cared about. He didn't make her carry the relationship because he brought his own energy into it. He communicated directly because he wasn't afraid of honesty. He stayed calm during disagreements because his sense of self wasn't threatened by every conflict. He kept moving after the breakup because his future didn't end when the relationship ended. All of those qualities came from the same place. He knew who he was. Not perfectly, not completely, but enough to stand on his own 2 feet, whether someone was standing beside him or not. That's the trait that becomes difficult to replace. Not because it's flashy, not because it's rare in theory, because in practice, very few people truly possess it. And when someone does, you often don't realize how valuable it was until they're no longer part of your life.